You ride through what seems to be a city in the middle of construction. You head towards the part of town that looks to be finished. Looking for what you have been told is a living god. After heading up the large staircase, you enter the temple. You approach the living god and he says to you,
I greet you with sincerity and pose a simple question. Will you assist us further, Outlander?
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to be discussing Vivec. More specifically, why would anyone choose to worship Vivec? To do this, we must first go over several things. Firstly, who even is Vivec? So his supposed origins, what he is known as by who, and why, along with what he is associated with. Then we will move on to the history of Vivec. So what historical events has Vivec been involved in? Along with this, we will discuss what is Vivec god over, along with who worships Vivec and how do they worship him. Finally, we will move on to discuss the creations of Vivec. This being the artifacts associated with him. So let us begin with who is Vivec. When it comes to the origin stories of Vivec as a being before his godhood, there is more than one story. The more normal story is that Vivec was the son of a Nechaman. As he grew up, he would eventually learn the trade from his father. Eventually, there would be the destruction of Al-Sotha. This was done by Mehrunes Dagon. This settlement was the ancestral home of the minor house, this being House Sotha. Now, all but one member of this house was killed in the destruction of this settlement, this being Sotha Sil. So according to this version of events, the young Sotha Sil would be taken in by Vivec and raised by him. Later, both Sotha Sil and Vivec would become generals and counselors to Indoril Nerevar, and Almalexia would be the queen. In this version, it is said that Vivec, before he would become a god, would take on and defeat a lurker, known as Vro Kul Shah. This lurker was a servant of Hermaeus Mora. The battle between Vivec and the lurker was said to be brutal, and Vivec would almost be defeated by the creature. However, Vivec would manage to beat it in the end. Now, the other origin and upbringing story of Vivec is a bit more strange. So in this case, Vivec's mother, who was like in the other story, the wife of a Nechaman, was approached by Am. Am most likely meaning Almalexia, as this is another name for her. So Am would approach Vivec's mother and would throw her into the ocean. Here she would be taken by the Dreg. They would transform her so she would give birth to an egg. Vivec's mother would stay with the Dreg for 7 to 8 months. After this, Vivec's mother would be visited by Set. This is another name for Sotha Sil. So Set would speak to Vivec's mother and tell her that the egg was important, that it must be nurtured until the arrival of the Hortator. Set would then take Vivec's mother back to the land. So Vivec, as an egg image, would be approached by 8 Daedra, known as the Barons, who move like this, and their leader, Demi-Prince Fa Nui Hen. This group would teach Vivec how to fight, and would also inform Vivec's mother where to find the Hortator, this being in the lands of Indoril. During the search for the Hortator, Vivec's mother, along with the egg of Vivec, would be approached by several spirits. The last of these spirits was actually the Daedric prince Mafala. The egg image would take the secrets of the Daedric prince. Vivec's mother would then wander with the egg to a Dweemiri cave. Now at this time, the Dwemer were enemies of the Chimer. They would kill Vivec's mother and take the egg, with the plan of studying it. However, this would not happen, as Vivec would curse them with a rumination of love. This would lead to the Dwemer building a simulacrum clone of Vivec's mother and placing the egg inside of it. They would then send them on their way. Vivec and the simulacrum would be approached by even more spirits. This includes members of the Coincidence Guild and an Old Bone of the Earth. An Old Bone of the Earth is a member of the El Nofe. Vivec would fuse with the Old Bone of the Earth, supposedly becoming a ruling king of the world. Eventually, the simulacrum of Vivec's mother would break down and fail, leading to the egg of Vivec becoming stranded. It would eventually be picked up by a caravan merchant who was headed for Almalexia, which was the capital city. In this group was Nerevar Indoril. Vivec would place a message in the head of Nerevar. This message would inspire Nerevar to kill the caravan captain and take over as captain of the caravans. continuing on the journey to the city of Almalexia. The Nereva and the egg of Vivec would then finally arrive in the city. Here they would be greeted by Sothosil and Almalexia. Then Vivec would emerge from his egg, and Nereva would become the Hortator. So now we should discuss what Vivec is also known as. Vivec as a tribunal god is known by many names, both by his worshippers and outsiders. An example of this is the title, the Mother-Father of Monsters. This title comes from the time after Vivec became a god, coming from Vivec's union with Molag Bal, as this union would create monstrous children. This is not the only name for Vivec. Vivec is also known as the Lord of the Middle Air. This coming from Sermon 33, as this is when Vivec would stop Lyrock or Bardal from plummeting into and colliding with Vivec City, holding this comet above the city as long as he was worshipped, encouraging the love of his followers. In the 4th era, we see a change in the title of Vivec to Saint Vivec. This no longer being a godly status, but a name used to venerate the most honored Dunmer ancestors. This comes as the Tribunal Temple went out and the new temple came back in with the reclamations. There are also the names for Vivec that come from outsiders, non-worshippers of the tribunal. These being names like Vivec the Liar, this seemingly coming from the Imperials, as the name of the author Jeremiah is an imperial name, along with this text discussing an imperial legion siege. We also have the Nord name for Vivec, this coming from the 5 songs of King Wulfharth. In this, Vivec is known as Vec the Devil. Both of these names point to the outsiders, especially the Nords and Imperials, having a strong dislike of the tribunal gods, seeing them as false gods or liars. But anyway, moving on from names. When it comes to the appearance of Vivec, we see that he is half Dunmer and half Chimer. It represents Vivec's desires. Sothosil claims that Vivec craves radical freedom, the death of all limits and all restrictions. He wishes to be all things at all times, every race, every gender, every hero, both divine and finite. But in the end, he can only be Vivec. Vivec wants to be everyone and everything, which is why he, unlike the other tribunal gods, is a representation of both the race they previously were and the race they are currently. We also see this desire to be everything in his title, the warrior poet. These two positions could be considered complete opposites, warriors fighting their battles with swords, and poets expressing their issues with words. Yet Vivec is both. When it comes to Vivec, there are also symbols that represent this tribunal god. These often hint at the duality of the character. A great example is the sword, being the symbol of Vivec, leading to the title of the blade. But this is not the only symbol of Vivec. There is also the harp, which lends to his occasional title of the lyre, which is another musical instrument. So these titles and symbols hint at the duality of Vivec, his desire to be complete opposites. So what does the origins and the names of Vivec tell us about why anyone would want to worship Vivec? Firstly, Vivec, in his more down-to-earth story of origins, where he was the son of a Netchman, was raised by him and learned the trade, gives a sort of relatability. This goes along with the whole anyone can become a saint, as long as you do good for your fellow Dunmer sort of vibe that comes with the Tribunal Temple. His rags to riches story may be seen as a sort of inspiring story that encourages people to follow the Tribunal Temple and do their best to achieve sainthood. If we look at the names that come along with Vivec, the warrior poet, the duality may be seen as inspiring, as it goes against putting yourself in a box, allowing the follower to seek out what may have been scary or may not have been their norm. As with Vivec, his pursuits could be seen as outside of the box and total opposites of each other. Vivec also being the warrior may inspire those who wish to become warriors to fight harder, to achieve status in their communities and be able to defeat difficult monsters, as Vivec once had. So those who worship Vivec may see him as an inspiration to challenge themselves and to attempt feats they may have viewed as difficult, along with challenging themselves to try things that would normally be seen as opposites of what they would normally do. But this is only one part of Vivec. To better understand why someone may want to worship Vivec, we need to explore his history. For the history of Vivec, we are going to begin with the war between the Chimer and the Nords. This is at the time of the Chimer and the Dwemer alliance. So at this time, the CV advisors and the Hortator Induril Nereva were already established. They had already united the groups within Resdayn, preparing these groups to fight the invading Nords who had taken over the country of Resdayn, which is now known as Morrowind. The battle to repel the Nords from Resdayn and win back the country would go on and on. Vivec and Nereva would take on the two strongest Nord chieftains. Both of these chieftains had the power of the voice. One of these chieftains, this being Chiuma the Running Hunger, had the ability to turn the rain in the clouds to bile. Chiuma would destroy several Chimeri villages and would even go on to eat the Chima hero, this being Dres Kismut-E. Chiuma would then send the shade of this hero as an assassin to Nereva in an attempt to get rid of him. This would be unsuccessful and the Nereva and Vivec would go on to kill Chiuma. Another of the chieftains that Vivec would face was known as Bag the Two-Tongued. Bag had the powers of Shorty and Form Change. And due to Vivec being a poet, he was the only one able to understand the power of the voice that Bag had. So this would lead to Vivec challenging him in a great debate, whilst Vivec became invisible to give him an edge. He was able to slay Bag. Then Vivec would take on Barfolk the Maid of Plains. Now Barfolk would appear as a winged human figure. She was a rather powerful foe, as through her singing she had the power to shape outcomes. So with this singing she would win every single battle. But she would not win the battle against Vivec, as Vivec would stop Barfolk from singing. Vivec would stick his milk finger in the mouth of Barfolk. This would allow Vivec to defeat her. Eventually, the Nordic chieftains and their empire would be defeated, this leading to the Chima-Dwemer alliance known as the First Council. Vivec would then go to the Ashland region of Molag Amur, doing so to practice his giant form. Here, he would be approached by the Daedric prince Molag Bal, who would ask for Vivec to join them. This would lead to the marriage between Molag Bal and Vivec. And now, the whole of Vivec would not stay for the entire occasion, as although he was not yet a god, he still had some interesting powers. Vivec's head would depart from the ceremony, which is known as the Pomegranate Banquet, and Vivec's body would stay with Molag Bal. Vivec's head would go on to advise the Hortator, and whilst this occurred, Molag Bal had used Vivec's body to produce a race of monster children. 8 of these monster children would escape from the Pomegranate Banquet. Vivec would go on to hunt down these 8 children. After this, we would see the War of the First Council and its aftermath. We do have a basic understanding of the events of the First Council War, these being the Dwemer had discovered the Heart of Lorkhan. They were using this to build themselves a new god, this being the Numidium. The Tribunal would find out about this and would confront the Dwemer about this. The Dwemer would be defeated and would disappear. The Tribunal, Dagoth, and Nereva would get the Kagranak tools and would discuss what to do with them. Vorin Dagoth would take them for safekeeping, whilst the Tribunal and Nereva debated on what to do with the tools. The Tribunal and Nereva would attempt to take the tools back from Dagoth, but he would refuse this. This would then cause a bloody battle where Dagoth would supposedly be dead afterwards, and so would the Hortator Nereva. However, the War of the First Council has been described in several different manners, with different important characters providing their own accounts, including Vivec's own accounts of the War of the First Council, which we see coming from his 36 sermons and interviews with Vivec. However, even Vivec's accounts of the events of the War of the First Council conflict with what he has said previously, as Vivec claims that he, unlike what the Ashlanders claim, did not murder Nereva. This comes from Vivec being interrogated by a dissident priest by the name of Malur Omayan. But if we look at the sermons of Vivec, there seems to be a hidden admission of guilt, which is rather interesting. Firstly, if we look at the first letter of every paragraph in sermon number 36, it spells out foul murder. Along with this, if you go through sermon 29 and look at the numbers, the first number in each paragraph corresponds to the sermon, and the next number in each paragraph corresponds to the word. An example of this is sermon 9. We are looking for word 11. So let's count 11 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The word is did. If you repeat this for all of them, you will get a paragraph. He was not born a god. His destiny did not lead him to this crime. He chose this path of his own free will. He stole the godhood and murdered the Hortator. Vivec wrote this. The sermon accounts which admit guilt in the death of Nerevar correlate with the Ashlander claims that Vivec murdered the Hortator. But anyway, moving on. Whose account of the First Council War and who killed Nerevar is a whole other kettle of slaughterfish for another day. So, now to a little while after the War of the First Council, this was after the Battle of Red Mountain. So the Dwemer have disappeared. Dagoth House are banished and the Hortator is dead. The tribunal had previously made a promise to the Daedric prince Azura that the Kagrenac tools would never be used to make gods. This, of course, was broken by the tribunal when they went to the center of the Red Mountain to use the tools on the heart of Lorkhan, doing this to become gods. The tribunal used the tools and made themselves gods. This then caused Azura to materialize and curse them along with the entire Chima race. The golden skin was no longer. Instead, it was replaced with the ashen grey, along with their eyes becoming as red as the volcano. So, with this newfound godhood, we would see the restructuring of the province, no longer known as Rithdain, now called Morrowind. This would lead to the change in the Great Houses, where the legacies of the Dwemer and Dagoth House would disappear, having the Ground Council now being made up of only 5 houses. Now, with the tribunal gods rising as a religion, they would be tested on their journey to popularity. We see this with the first of these tests being the vengeance of Ash King Wulfharth, who attempted to destroy the tribunal. Wulfharth did this through summoning a mighty storm and assembling an army of Nords to march and kill the tribunal. However, they would be defeated by the tribunal forces as the united Morrowind was too hard to defeat. This was not the only test that the tribunal would face in the First Era. We also see that of the Saessi of Akavir invading Cyrodiil through Morrowind in the year 2703 in the First Era. This would lead to some precarious alliances. Vivec would make an unusual alliance with the Dreg and their Trident Kings. With this alliance, Vivec would strike at the Saessi invaders from the rear, stopping their supply line and causing them to fight on 2 fronts rather than the original one over in Cyrodiil. This would lead to Vivec and Raman realizing that they had a common enemy. This would lead to them striking up an alliance, agreeing to take down the Saessi together. But even with this alliance, the relationship between the two nations would be shaky as time went on. Mistrust between the two nations would begin to grow. Eventually, Raman I would die under mysterious circumstances and Raman II would take over as emperor. So, in the year 2840, in the First Era after the Second Empire had managed to take over Black Marsh, Raman II would set his eyes on Morrowind. This would cause the Fourscore War. During this time, great leadership and power would be demonstrated by the tribunal, especially by Vivec. The war would still be raging on 80 years later in the year 2920 in the First Era, this being under Raman III. Now at this time, Vivec would spend much of his time in Mournhold as he and Almalexia had grown rather close. Almalexia would have a prophetic dream, which she would share with Vivec. This dream claimed that the war would end, but if Sotha Sil did not return to Morrowind, Morrowind would lose the war. Almalexia would leave Morrowind to go collect Sotha Sil, and Vivec would remain, preparing for the battles to come. After several small fights and acts of diplomacy by Vivec, we would see a truce signed, this ending the war. Morrowind did remain independent through the truce, but friendly towards the Second Empire, having a sort of trading relationship. This being until the Second Empire would collapse in the year 430 in the Second Era, moving on to the year 572 in the Second Era. This is when the Second Akaviri invasion would occur. The Akaviri snow demons, also known as the Kamal, would firstly invade Skyrim through Windhelm, managing to destroy the unprepared city. They would then attempt to attack Riften, however the Nords were more prepared this time, and would manage to fight them off. This would lead to the Kamal turning their attention to Morrowind. The Dunmer troops under the guidance of Almalexia and the Nords would fight together, attempting to defeat the Akavir. They would also be helped by the Argonian Shellbacks, led by Haytamin. This helped to push the Akavir back, but would not defeat them. This is where Vivec would come in. Vivec would teach the Dunmer how to breathe underwater, so that Vivec could flood the beach they were fighting on and drown the Kamal forces. This would lead to victory for the United Forces, and it would lead to what is known as the Ebonheart Pact. This pact would be important for what was yet to come, as the Three Banners War would begin in the year 578 in the Second Era. So this war was still going strong in the year 582, and this is when Vivec would request the assistance of the Vestige. He would request that the Vestige would visit an ancestor known as Verena Andrano. This visit was to ask about the fluctuations in Vivec's power. The ancestor would tell them that an old enemy had returned, but not the enemy they expected. After some investigation by the Vestige, this enemy would turn out to be Qanun Chodala, falsely claiming to be the Naravarine. The false Naravarine had been using Sothasil's staff, Sunara. With this staff, he had been attempting to steal Vivec's divine power. This would lead to Azura declaring the false Naravarine's sister, Sirin, as her champion, and through this would provide the Vestige and Vivec with assistance. Together, Sirin and the Vestige would confront the false Naravarine and defeat them. The Sunara would then be taken by Sirin and the Vestige. The staff would be used in an attempt to return Vivec's power. However, this did not go as planned. Archcanon Travis, who they had given the staff to, was not exactly who they claimed. Instead, it would actually be Barbas, who was the minion of Clavicus Vile, who had been disguised as the High Priest Archcanon Travis for quite some time. This would lead to Vivec further being drained of his power, even losing his ability to hold up Bardao in the sky above Vivec City. With the help of the Vestige and Azura, Vivec's power would be boosted and the Moonlit would not collide with the city. They would also assist in restoring Vivec back to his full power. Now we move on to after the Three Banners War into the year 882, still in the Second Era. This is when the Tribunal would resume what was supposed to be their annual trip to restore their powers through the use of the Heart of Lorkhan. However, they would be ambushed by Dagoth and his Ash vampires. This would prevent the Tribunal gods from replenishing their powers. With the return of Dagoth came the Ash Blight. As the Tribunal gods fled the Red Mountain, Vivec would help the Dunmer refugees to safety in this fleeing, leading them to Nesis. Whilst the Tribunal Temple was dealing with this, there would be events occurring over in the rest of Tamriel. Tiber Septim was taking over the provinces of Tamriel to create a new empire. Initially, he was hesitant to attack the Dunmer. However, he desired the rich deposits of ebony that were found throughout the various mines in Morrowind. Tiber Septim would eventually launch attacks on Morrowind and attempt to invade, with some claims that Septim was encouraged to invade by an old enemy of the Tribunal, this being Ismir Wolfhearth, who was allegedly now going by the title Underking. Zurin Arctis would discourage Septim from going after Morrowind, however, as there was a strong need for ebony, Septim would ultimately ignore this. Behind the scenes of this war, Tiber Septim and Vivec would be attempting to negotiate peace, as both groups had their own concerns about waging a full-on war. Tiber Septim was concerned about waging a full-fledged war against living gods, along with the wild card looming in the background that was Dagoth The Tribunal gods did not want to waste their strength battling the Imperials when Dagoth was still a major concern, as they were not able to renew their powers due to his occupation of Red Mountain and his possession of the Heart. So with this, the armistice would be signed. The terms of the armistice being announced to the Tribunal Temple and the Grand Council by Vivec. These terms permitted Morrowind self-governance and allowed them to retain their own faith, this of course being Tribunal Temple. But anyway, moving on. Throughout the years, the Tribunal gods would continue their yearly pilgrimage to the Heart of Lorkhan. However, this would be more of a war campaign against Dagoth and his minions than just a simple pilgrimage. They would manage to slay Dagoth several times, however, with his connection to the Heart of Lorkhan, he would manage to survive and be revived before the trio could make it to the Heart. This is when the group realized that they could not actually destroy these creatures. In an attempt to contain them, along with stopping the spread of the Blight, they would construct the Ghost Fence. The Ghost Fence contained the entirety of Red Mountain. and the ghost fence was maintained by the power of Vivec and the Tribunal. But it also used the remains of the Dunmer people as a way of providing more power to contain the forces of Daedra. With the construction and the maintenance of the ghost fence, Vivec and the Tribunal relied on the faith of the Dunmer even more. This led to harsher persecution of the dissident priests and those who discussed the Naravarine prophecy. Around this time, Vivec was the only tribunal god based in Vardenfell, so he became the sort of protector of the island, fighting against the Sixth House and the creatures it created. However, the Sixth House had continued to gain a foothold, further spreading the blight and even managing to regain Kogurun, an old fort of the Sixth House. In the Third Era, in the year 417, there would be a further blow to Vivec and the other tribunal gods, this being with 2 of the 3 Kagrenac tools being lost during one of the campaigns against the Sixth House. This would lead to the tribunal essentially losing all ability to renew their powers. Moving on to the year 427 in the Third Era, as this is when the blight would become so potent and deadly, even causing what was known as soul sickness. The will of Dagoth was spreading across Vardenfell, with Dagoth invading the dreams of citizens of Vardenfell along with his use of diplomacy to gain the trust and alliance of those who were angry with the tribunal. The Sixth House grew even bolder in their moves. We see this with the assassinations of imperial figures, House Falu members who were seen as imperial sympathizers, and even temple ordinators. During this time, a mysterious outsider would appear in Vardenfell, sent there by Uriel Septim VII. This outsider, through the help of an agent of the Blades, would begin to follow the steps of the Naravarine prophecy, which would lead to the temple and Vivec becoming hostile towards them, labeling them as an enemy. This was due to Vivec viewing the outsider as a threat to the faithfulness of the Dunmer people, as the faith of the Dunmer was needed to keep the ghost fence operational. Vivec's position on the outsider would change when the Great Houses would go on to name the outsider as their Hortator, and the Ashlanders naming the outsider as their Naravarine. The outsider would then be advised by the Archcanon of the Temple that the Tribunal was desperate, and that the Naravarine may be their last hope. This would be when Vivec would announce that they were no longer persecuting the dissident priests and the Naravarine. Vivec would then give the Naravarine the last of the Kagrenac tools, teaching them to use it. The Naravarine would manage to sever the link between the heart of Lorkhan and Dagoth, allowing for him to be defeated. After this, the Naravarine would head to the mainland and would find Almalexia. The Naravarine would do several tasks for Almalexia, eventually finding out that due to the destruction of the heart of Lorkhan, she had gone mad and killed Sotha Sil. Planning to do the same to the Naravarine would defeat Almalexia and inform Vivec of what Almalexia had done. Now, not much is known of Vivec's fate after the year 427 in the Third Era. Some claim that the Naravarine killed him, but there is also claim that he saved Saint Juib after the events of the Naravarine prophecy and was the one to make him into a saint. There is another rumor that claims that Vivec had been taken by the Daedric hordes that came with the appearance of Mehrunes Dagon. By the Fourth Era, it seems as if Vivec had disappeared, with the magic that had held Bardal above the city weakening day by day being a sign of this. This would lead to a deal with a Daedric prince by the name of Clavicus Vile. This deal created a machine known as the Ingenium. It was used to keep Bardal afloat in return for souls to be sent to the realm of Clavicus Vile. However, this device would be destroyed by one of its creators, and this would lead to Bardal colliding with Vivec City. The impact would lead to Red Mountain erupting. This destroyed Vardenfell and part of mainland Morrowind. In the history books of the Dunmer, it is often known as the Red Year. This is where Vivec, for the most part in the Dunmeri pantheon, was no longer worshipped as a god. He was viewed as either dead or disappeared, and was now labelled as a saint by the New Temple, who took over the Dunmer religion. So based on the history of Vivec, why would anyone choose to worship him? Well, if we look at the hand Vivec has had in several battles and wars, it would seem as if he is a sort of protector to the Dunmer people. He did after all form an alliance with the Dreg and their Trident Kings to help rid Morrowind of the Akaviri troops who were marching through towards Cyrodiil. We also see Vivec protecting the Dunmeri people with his actions in the second Akaviri invasion, this being where he taught his people how to breathe underwater and then he flooded the beach, this being to drown the Akaviri invaders. We also see other heroic feats before Vivec was even a god, like his participation in the war with the Nords. Here Vivec defeated many Nordic chieftains and helped to repel the Nords from Morrowind. With all of these feats, he earned his warrior title, and this would really make him appear as a protector of the Dunmer people as a god. So based on the history of Vivec, many would have turned to worshipping him due to the protection he seemed to offer. But this is only part of the story, not the full picture. So now we should move on to discuss who worships Vivec. When it comes to the worshippers of Vivec, they are primarily Dunmer, as the Tribunal Temple religion has primarily been localized to Morrowind. But even with them being a religion that was primarily in one province, we do see the expansion of the Imperial Empire along with the Ebonheart Pact, other races joining the ranks of the Tribunal Temple. So within the Tribunal Temple, there are various beliefs relating to Vivec, like that surrounding his good Daedra anticipation. According to the Tribunal Temple belief, the good Daedra anticipation of Vivec is that of Mephala. This being due to, of course, several reasons. Firstly, Mephala is considered to be more of an androgynous Daedra. This fits with Vivec's desire to be anything and everything at once, both woman and man. Along with Mephala having strong ties to death and murder. We see this with her association with the Morag Tong, as Mephala was said to have been the creator of this guild. Vivec, being the warrior, strongly embodies this as well. We also see Vivec's hand in the Morag Tong. We see this with the Morag Tong assassin Naryu Virian requesting a writ from Vivec for permission to assassinate the Grand Master of the Morag Tong. Now this is only one aspect of the belief that comes from the Tribunal Temple. We also have the various aspects of Vivec. Vivec is known to have multiple forms or aspects, these being useful in various different situations, but also being important in the worship and the stories of this god. An example of this being his giant form. Giant form is, as it sounds, Vivec essentially becoming giant in size. Now Vivec's giant form has made several appearances. This form primarily featuring in legendary battles that Vivec has been part of. This being in his battles against two of his monster children, these being the Ruddy Man in Sermon 28 and Moon Axle in Sermon 20, along with Vivec's meeting with Molag Bal in Sermon 12. This being the Pomegranate Banquet. There are also other aspects of Vivec, like that of Waterface. Now this one is slightly more complex. So with Waterface, Vivec supposedly learnt this before his birth, being taught this from the Dreg. This aspect makes Vivec unable to lie, forcing him to speak in a more straightforward manner than the usual riddles. This is rather interesting because it also hints at him being able to see the truth with this aspect, including removing his own bias from his thoughts. There are also other aspects like that of God's city. Now what makes this aspect interesting is that Vivec's city was initially built upon the remains of one of his monster children, Horde Mountain, eventually expanding past it. Along with this, Vivec would also incorporate pieces of his own divine essence into gems, these being known as blessing stones. These blessing stones were important for building the city, as they were built into its core. With the essence of Vivec being built into the very core of the city, this would expand the divinity of Vivec and give him a sort of omnipresence throughout the city. So, Vivec's city is not just named after Vivec, but it is Vivec. With Vivec, we also see the other types of worshippers, such as the buoyant armigers, these being Vivec's own personal honor guard. These supposedly embody Vivec more than regular ordinators, having values of wit, courtesy, poetry, and riddling. These warriors are sent on quests by Vivec and have a much closer connection than most regular citizens. However, as Vivec is considered to be a favorite of the Tribunal gods, citizens all over Morrowind praise him and his victories, and allegedly celebrate his birthdays as well. With those who worship Vivec, we should also take into account those who hate Vivec along with the other Tribunal gods. An example of this being the Red Guards. This hatred coming from back when the Red Guards still inhabited the continent of Yakuta. For this, we have to jump back into the First Era. So Nerevar was still alive and Yakuta still existed. No one was a god yet. Nerevar and Vivec would travel to Yakuta and would go to study with Yakutan warriors. After a year of learning, Vivec would take one of the Yakutan kings as a wife, and they would supposedly have monster children. So Vivec Vivec is allegedly known by several names when it comes to the Red Guards, and none of them being too positive. This is not the only group who have negative views on the Tribunal Gods and Vivec, with the Ultima cousins of the Dunmer referring to them as the trio of wily demon spawn. However, this is not the most interesting denial or dislike of the Tribunal. This actually comes from the text Tribunal Living Lies. In this, the author, who calls himself the Disordinator, claims that the three Tribunal Gods are not what they seem. Instead, the Tribunal Gods are actually one entity. This entity being a giant monster from the void. They use their supposed divinity to harvest souls for their true master. And this is why the Ebonheart Pact was formed. This is why they went to war during the Three Banners War. This giant monster pretending to be the three divine living gods is getting into your head. It is everywhere. It is all around you. It is in the air. They control the bees. The bees are not what they seem. They control everyone through the chants in the evening. Those are actually mind control spells. And don't even think about drinking the well water in Mournhold either. Run whilst you still can. But anyway, enough about conspiracy theories. Based on all of this, why would anyone choose to worship Vivec? Well, if you believe that the Tribunal God are actually mind control masters sent from the void, well, you have no choice in worshipping Vivec or the giant creature that pretends to be him. But if the Disordinator conspiracy is not really your thing, and we look into the aspects of Vivec, more specifically God City, this being where there is a piece of Vivec in the base of every canton, and its foundations is built upon one of his great heroic feats, so Vivec provided a home for his followers, and slayed Horde Mountain to build this home on top of. So based on this, Vivec once again lives up to the protector and warrior ideal that the Dunmer have of him. And with him taking over the role of Mafala in the Morak Tong, which we see with him providing Naryu Virian, a writ for the Grand Master, we also see this sort of protector and warrior of the people role again. So with the Dunmer and Tribunal Temple worship of Vivec as a god, he can be seen as a provider and a protector to those who worship him. But this is only one piece of the puzzle. To gain a better understanding, we should discuss the creations of Vivec. So let us discuss some of the relevant monster children of Moloch Baal and Vivec. One of the children of Vivec and Moloch Baal is known as Horde Mountain, and what is interesting about this child is that it is actually the origins for two other positive things when it comes to Vivec. Obviously Vivec City, but also the buoyant armigers. So the reason that we would firstly have the buoyant armigers existing because of Horde Mountain is because of three lower houses helping to trap Horde Mountain. This would allow Vivec to kill Horde Mountain by using his spear Muatra, and due to the hand they played in the defeat of Horde Mountain, the three lower houses would be named Vivec's buoyant armigers. Vivec would then take the bones of Horde Mountain and throw them northeast. Where the bones landed, Vivec would build the City of Swords, which is also known as Vivec City. Now, the next child, this being Bardal, has its own interesting origin stories. There are actually two claims that relate to Bardal being a monster child when it comes to its origin stories. One of these suggesting that Bardal is not a final form. Instead, it is more of an egg or a chrysalis that will eventually hatch a monster as its final form. This monster is, of course, destined to fight Vivec in this version of its origin story. Or there is the more traditional origin story relating to the union of Moloch Baal and Vivec. So in this story, Bardal, also known as Lyrock, was born of Vivec's second aperture and was thrown out of the pomegranate banquet by a member of the Sweeps. Now the Sweeps are a long forgotten guild of broom handlers, so the Sweeps threw out Bardal. Bardal would fly into the heavens and meet with the Void Ghost, who you may know as Lorcan. The Void Ghost told Bardal to stay with them for 100 years and he would grant Lyrock much power. But before this 100 years was up, Vivec would find Bardal. Vivec would then send the Hortator after Bardal. But the Hortator would not encounter Bardal first. Instead, he would encounter the Void Ghost and would become distracted. This is when Bardal would take its chance. Bardal would launch its own attack, plummeting towards Vivec City. But it would be stopped, held in mid-air, and Vivec would stab Lyrock with Muatra, and it would be left above the city. So no matter what story you believe of Bardal, there is the rather interesting phrase that comes from Sermon 33 relating to its position. This being in response to the Hortator asking if Vivec wished for the moonlet to be moved. Vivec replied with, I would have done so myself if I wanted, silly Hortator. I shall keep it there with its last intention intact, so that if the love of the people of this city for me ever disappear, so shall the power that holds back their destruction. But anyway, moving on to the final child from the cursed union of Molagbal and Vivec, this being Golga Mor Jill. Now this child was considered to be the most powerful of all of Vivec's children, but what is interesting about this is that he instead would be the easiest to kill. So what would occur in the hunt for Golga Mor Jill is that Vivec and Nerevar would find the 8th child near a village that was previously founded by Sothasil and Almalexia. There Golga Mor Jill sat with his legs in the ocean, looking troubled, yet not challenging Vivec to a fight. Instead, the child would ask Vivec why he should have to die and return to oblivion. Vivec would tell Golga Mor Jill that it would be unwise to betray his true nature. However, this of course did not satisfy the monster child, and Vivec would then tell his monstrous child the same poem that he told his mother as she died. The fire is mine, let it consume thee, and make a secret door at the altar of Padhome, in the house of Boetia, where we become safe and looked after. A peaceful look would wash over the face of Golga Mor Jill, and he would welcome death. Vivec would use the Muatra to kill the last of his children, and the city of Necrom would be built above Golga Mor Jill. Like Horde Mountain, the bones of Golga Mor Jill would make the foundations of an important city in the Dunmeri culture. So now that we know about the monster children of Vivec, we should discuss some of the artifacts of Vivec, both the weapons and the less violent artifacts associated with him. To do this, we should start with Sword Not Held. With this, Sword Not Held is rather literal, as during battle, this sword is not actually held by its user, which we can see in the various depictions of Vivec using the sword. However, the descriptions do not match the depictions. As with the fighting of Moon Axel, the sword not held is actually described as curved. But anyway, another of the artifacts that are important when it comes to Vivec is the Muatra. This artifact is often pictured with Vivec in both statues and in drawings of Vivec. We also see this spear often with Vivec. So the name Muatra means milk taker. This spear comes from the pomegranate banquet, after Vivec's head had returned from advising the Hortator. Vivec would learn how to transform his spear into something worse after biting Molagbal, which led to the creation of the Muatra, which had new abilities, no longer being just a spear, having the ability to transform those it touched into bone. This making him a powerful foe or a powerful ally, depending on what side of him you are. There is also the less dangerous artifacts that highlight the duality of Vivec, these being items like Vivec's lyre. The lyre is found near Vivec in some depictions of the Tribunal God, as Vivec is known as a poet as well as a warrior. He is also known for his writing of songs that he performs in the temples, highlighting that Vivec is known for more than just war. So, based on the creations of Vivec, why is he worshipped? Well, if we look at the children of Vivec, more specifically Bardal, are you scared of being crushed to death by an evil space rock? Yeah, Vivec thought so. This could be a strong contender as to why he is worshipped by some. But if we look at the other children, we see that with the story of Horde Mountain, Vivec rewarded those who helped him in defeating one of his monster children, making those 3 lesser houses the buoyant armigers, along with creating a home for many in Morrowind. If we also look at the story of Golga Mor Jill, where Vivec recites a poem, and although he still kills his last child, he does so mercifully. He shows kindness in death, hinting that Vivec can also be a merciful god on occasion. So the stories of the monster children highlight the duality of Vivec. In the harshness that is holding Bardal above a city to force love, he also provides mercy and kindness to what was supposedly the most difficult child of his to kill. So some may worship Vivec due to the fact he highlights that very little in this world is black and white or straightforward. No matter what the case, you will always be viewed as evil to one and good to some. So based on the origins of Vivec, his story, who worships him, along with his creations, we can finally answer the question, why would anyone choose to worship Vivec? So if we turn our attention to the origins of Vivec, the rags to riches sort of story when he was the child of a Netchman, we see this inspiring story that gives people the idea that as long as you do good, you can become just like him. We also see with his history how he worked hard, fought hard, and helped to defeat the many enemies of Morrowind, the inspiration for the warriors of Morrowind. So why those who are in a sort of fighting role may look up to him, seeing Vivec as a sort of role model, and why others may view him as a protector of Morrowind of sorts, rather than just a god who sits back and observes. We see this with his pre-god heroics in the war with the Nords, defeating various chieftains like Tuma and Bag, along with his heroics after becoming a god like during the second Akaviri invasion, where Vivec would teach his people how to breathe underwater before flooding the battlefield to sweep the invading Akavir away and drown them. So historically, Vivec has always been heroic and had a protective role for the people of Morrowind, even stepping into a sort of provider role for them, which we see in both the aspects of Vivec and the creations. As with the creation of God City through the destruction of Horde Mountain, Vivec provided homes and created an entire new faction known as the Buoyant Armigers, encouraging the worship of Vivec. So to the followers of the Tribunal Temple, Vivec provides multiple things in his role as a god. He provides a reminder of responsibility and respect through the holding of Bardal over their heads, literally. Albeit it's a bit manipulative and cruel, but he has also protected the people of Morrowind from wars and his own monstrous children. He has also provided work for those who do not fit the box of just a warrior or a poet, but has traits of both of these, allowing for these people to express themselves and be themselves. And he has also provided shelter through Vivec City, which he imbued with his own essence, and built on top of one of his own children. So you yourself may want to worship Vivec as a Dunmer or as an outsider if you realize the world is not so black and white, but instead a bit more grey, that people often don't neatly fit into a box, and you likely don't either. So let me know in the comments if you would worship Vivec. A special thank you to all of our lore archaeologist supporters. You guys help keep this channel running. And thank you to anyone who is joining our memberships. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you should check out this one. It is about who exactly are the Dunmer of the Elder Scrolls series.